Great that you're listening to a new episode of the Product Owner Podcast. My name is Ruud, and every week on this podcast I sit down with an interesting guest from the world of product. And today's guest is Dave West, CEO of Scrum.org, the company that actually founded Scrum. The topic we're diving in today was raised by Dave himself and got me thinking right away. Because a lot of organizations are still struggling to move from project thinking to true product thinking. But what does that really mean? What is a product exactly? How do you know which products your organization supports? And how do you figure out which products you, as a team or a product owner, are responsible for? A struggle you might recognize yourself. For me, a perfect reason to have this conversation today with my guest, Dave. Welcome to the studio.
Oh, Ruud, thank you for inviting me. It's great to be in Utrecht in a sunny, spring-like day.
Yeah, it was different, right? When we were in this podcast last September, I remember.
Yes, I mean, we were at the product owner event in, where was that? In Rotterdam?
Rotterdam, yes. Ahoy, Rotterdam.
Yeah. Which was a fantastic event. And just listeners, if you have the chance to go to the event, it's probably the best product owner, dare I say, the best product event I've ever been to. A lot of very passionate people, a lot of great ideas, lots of amazing sharing. But anyway, we were there and it was cold and wet and a little different in terms of weather, but also a very energetic day, just like today.
Yeah, that was cool. Yeah, it was very nice to have you there. Again, this year you will be there. But before we dive into that topic and the topic about defining a product, maybe not all listeners do know you. Can you introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Dave West. I live in Boston, Massachusetts, as you can tell from my accent, which actually is increasingly American every day. So it's very embarrassing and a bit of a trial that I live. I run Scrum.org for Ken Schwaber, the co-creator of Scrum. Ken's chairman of the board. I'm the CEO of Scrum.org. So you can imagine what it's like to have Ken Schwaber come to your sprint reviews. It's a very traumatic moment.
Yeah.
He has some very interesting perspective. Don't invite him to a retrospective, otherse you
Why
will.
Not?
He's got so many good ideas, and you end up realizing how bad you are at everything, which is awful. But anyway, so I work for him, and I run Scrum.org. But my passion isn't, dare I say it, isn't Scrum. It's actually product, and I'm a product manager by sort of training. By vocation, I was the chief product officer at a startup called TaskTop that was bought by PlanView. Some of you may have read From Project to Product by Mick Kirsten. He was my boss at TaskTop. So I'm definitely into product ownership and product management and how do you release products. That's really my passion. But day to day, I'm a CEO. So though I do have some product responsibilities for Scrum.org, I also have 3 product owners that do amazing jobs reporting to me.
Okay, so in your company yourself, you have 3 product owners that report to you.
Yeah.
You're not taking really care of the product owner business on daily yourself?
So it's interesting because when we incubate products, sometimes I take a product owner type set of responsibilities and accountabilities. So at the moment, we have something called Agile Product Operating Model, which I'm treating as a product, meaning, defining a clear customer, defining a value proposition in terms of value for us as an organization and also for the community at large. So I'm taking more of an active product ownership role. I have a vision that keeps changing a lot at the moment. So there are times where I become a product owner inside our organization. And then, like any good CEO, I transition it quickly when it gets really hard to somebody that I can shout at.
Yeah. You told me before that product owner is about accountability, and I assume or I see that being a CEO is also about accountability and taking responsibility for the things you're doing. Right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of synergy between CEO and product owner, particularly around owning the P&L, owning the cost value, proposition that you're working, evangelizing, managing stakeholders, one of which is Ken Schwaber, is a key part of being a CEO, which is very similar to product ownership.
Yeah.
And actually, when you look at CEO, you could consider the organization as a product, right? It delivers goods and services. It has a clear set of stakeholders. Obviously, it's much bigger than most products, or maybe it's not if you're an international bank or whatever. But there's definitely some things that I have to worry about that maybe product people don't have to worry about. Filing taxes, stuff like that. HR
responsibilities.
Those kind of things. And I would encourage most organizations to remove those from product owners because to allow them to concentrate on product. However, what I tend to do, which is any good product owner does, is I delegate, right? Particularly those responsibilities. I'm fortunate that my COO is just amazing, Eric Neiberg, and he's taken over a lot of those day-to-day operational responsibilities, allowing me to concentrate on stuff that is more synergistic with product, which is vision, which is stakeholder management, which is evangelism, which is building that roadmap, making sure that we're executing on the most valuable things we can be executing on as an organization. So, maybe a product owner always, and I end up reshaping every job that I have to be a product owner.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good learning for all product owners if you're listening. Like, try to delegate some things that make you able to do your job as a product owner and your responsibilities as a product owner. Yeah, be able to do it better instead of trying to pick up all the things you can do. Learn to delegate as well. And a good delegator could be a good product owner.
I think we often get very hung up with, the product owner has to manage the backlog, has to put all the things in the backlog, do estimation and planning, make sure that they've got the product roadmap, make sure they got the vision, manage all the stakeholders. And most product owners, it was true in the event last year in Rotterdam, would come to me and go, I'm just too busy. I can't do all those things. And you're saying I need to be a product manager as well. So I need to do all that out-facing stuff. And obviously Scaled Agile Framework breaks that down into product manager and product owner as a fixed set of responsibilities.
Yeah,
I don't like that. And the reason why I don't like that is because ultimately you need somebody that can make decisions that's closest to the work.
Yeah.
And that means that you need to ultimately have that empowered ownership in the Scrum team. Yeah. So that simple delegation of, okay, you define the vision, the outward stuff, and I do all the working with the team or teams. It just doesn't work. So instead, what I tend to encourage is for product owners really to take responsibility for the product, but then to take advantage of the teams around them to actually help them be successful. Yep. Don't be an island, and I think that if we can manage that effectively, then you can get that rapid decision making, that's necessary for effective product ownership inside the delivery organization, while still providing that vision, connecting to those stakeholders and managing all those things. The bottom line is there's always too much work. I could spend every minute of every day and some looking at our strategic, environment, looking at the competitors, reading every single book that's published. I could spend a lot of time doing all those things, and I can't, right? So you have to prioritize that work. But I'm very fortunate that I've got a team around me that can help me. And that's what I lean into.
Yeah, it's very interesting to hear your vision on the product owner and product manager within one team or one company. It's actually a topic that's been requested quite a lot for the podcast itself, because in the Netherlands we see that quite a lot of companies are doing it like that. So having a product owner and a product manager, and in every case the product owner is struggling with accountability, responsibility, but also fuzzy information like who's taking care of what, who's talking to the clients, who's talking to the users. Yeah, totally good. That's gonna be definitely an interesting topic to discuss.
And I know we have other things to talk about, but I just want to finish, if that's okay. Just one, the separation between strategy and execution is something that we want to reduce as much as possible. I think every organization, the simplest and the most successful companies are ones where there's one team working, When we were a startup at TaskTop, we had initially one team, right? 5 software engineers, myself, the CEO, Mick. It was very small. We had like 3 salespeople, and that was it. And we were doing it, and it was great because you could rapidly respond, you could learn, everybody knew everything. There was high bandwidth communication between. As you grow, there is always this sort of desire to put in a lot of hierarchy. That person over there is responsible for strategy. That person over there is responsible for execution. That person over there is responsible for quality, for delivery, et cetera, et cetera. Now, some of those hierarchies make total sense. However, the reality is that if you distance strategy from execution, you will increase the latency in decision making and create the opportunity for sort of that game of telephone that we all play, misunderstanding, misinterpretation, etc. So you need to keep that to the smallest as possible. Now, I would argue that would mean that you need to create an accountability that encompasses that, and that person works dynamically with the teams around them in a sort of more of a network, less of a hierarchy, ensuring that those teams are moving towards that strategy in the most effective way. And, we're very fortunate that we can leverage technology like AI, et cetera, to increase the scale of your bandwidth or your scale, and which will make it real, and you can actually do it. So I think that thinking a very simple separation of strategy to execution isn't an ideal model. And no, I understand why Scaled Agile did it, and it makes a lot of sense on paper. The reality is you have to bring those two accountabilities into one.
Accountability, empower teams, product owners with mandate. That's what makes companies and products successful. Right?
Exactly.
Hey, it's like we talked about it. It's like 6 months ago. We've seen each other, and we recorded the episode. I think it's the end of September. You can find it on Spotify still. That was the last time we saw each other as well. So I'm just curious, what are your main learnings as CEO of Scrum.org in the last, let's say, 6 months?
So I'm going to focus on one area, which is around Agile Product Operating Model, because that's what I was speaking, what we spoke about in Utrecht. Not in Utrecht, in Rotterdam, all these Dutch cities.
I like it that you know some of the Dutch cities already.
I'm trying, I seem to zoom around the Netherlands on a regular basis. But so we were talking about the Agile Product Operating Model and the fact that a lot of organizations were trying to transition from project thinking to product thinking. And the operating model was ultimately a set of ideas, framework, dare I call it, that helps organizations describe an endpoint and then transition to that. And we're talking about how organizations were still wrestling with that. And that hasn't changed. But since then, we've been adding a lot of content around the Agile Product Operating Model. We've been running webinars. We've been writing. I've been writing a lot. Our community, professional Scrum trainer community, have been writing a lot more. We've talked about portfolio management. We've talked about organization models. We've talked about product definition. And that's something that you and I, when we were preparing for this podcast, found sort of super interesting. But the material of the content that's being created, what seems to be true and what is increasingly true in the last 6 months is the importance organizations are putting to this idea of a product and the importance of it. And I think to some extent, it's being accelerated by things like AI, where you've got to have a bound problem space. You've got to have a very clear idea of the outcomes that you're seeking. You've got to understand value to take advantage of these amazing technologies. In a project culture, AI has very little application because it can help you do a task a bit better. So if the task is, build a user story about X, then it can do that better. Yeah. But ultimately, that's not valuable because it could still be the wrong story. It could still potentially not provide value. Whereas positioning AI in the context of customers' problems or users' problems, that's when you get to leverage this internet of every single possible idea in the world And you get to leverage that in a very constructive way. So I think to some extent the need for product thinking is definitely expanded in the last 6 months. In parallel, though, the desire to spend money by organizations and the ability for them to change in a very traumatic, or and that's perhaps not the right word, changeable world that we're seeing, in the socio-political sense, has sort of, organizations want to go product. They definitely want to invest and realign to product. However, that transition, they're not going to bring in a McKinsey or a BCG quite as quickly now and spend that money. So that's what I'm saying. When we've been running these webinars at scrum.org, which is probably the place where the most people come and talk about this stuff, we're getting 3,000-4,000 people to these webinars, which is incredible. And, 600 questions or 700 questions. Like the discussion is amazing.
Like a live discussion in the chat or something like that?
Chats.
Okay, cool.
And people talking to each other. I'm not sure they're listening to me anymore, which is probably very sensible.
You just host a chat.
I don't know why I'm there, It's like, I can imagine a musician at a bar where you just see everybody just talking and you're like, I'm doing my best. But anyway, the discussion is incredible. But what is clear is that in many organizations, and I think this is the reason why this topic resonated when we were preparing, they're having a real problem defining what a product is. And I think that universal problem ends up constraining them throughout.
Yeah, what resonates to me is you told something about product, and it has not really boundaries. Does a product have boundaries? Yes or no? And what is the area, the restricted area that you as a product owner are responsible for? I see a lot of product owners struggling with the boundaries of a product. So we started discussing this, and then I thought, okay, you said to me, okay, it's hard to define, or let's say, what's a product? So the boundaries was for me very important, because I thought, I don't really know what the boundaries of a product are. So what is a product exactly? How can I name a product, or can everything be a product? So that's why it was very interesting about your opinion about it. Yeah,
so in preparation for the webinar that I delivered, before Christmas, I think, so a long time ago, I interviewed a bunch of organizations. One of the great things about being the CEO of Scrum.org is that you can leverage that title when people are doing Scrum. So like, I want to talk to the CEO of Scrum.org, which is cool. And so I get the opportunity to talk to a lot of organizations. And I went into that first conversation, which was with a large financial institution. And I walked into that virtually, it wasn't in person, with this very clear idea that a product has to be something that makes money, that something has to be a clear value proposition. It has to be
is it like a checklist of things? Like, this is a product.
So I went in with that in mind, very similar to the large scale Scrum model, by Craig and Baz, where it has to have a dollar sign on it, right? And so I went in, and they've had 2 rounds of product modeling, and I was talking to the IT department. So they're calling it the IT product model in their own organization, primarily because of the politics with their business, who have a other product model. Anyway, so they have this IT product model, and I said, okay, so this is what I think a product is. So, and they went, nah. That would be great, but that isn't the reality. And so I uncovered this spider's web of politics, of legacy systems, of power dynamics, of status, authority, of constraints with outsourced vendors, legal constraints. Actually, one hour they have a product that's about customer, and I'm like, well, how can a customer be a product? And they went, well, funny you should say that. When we separated that function and just made it a service that all these different product teams could update, what we found was the product teams weren't doing it consistently, and we got sued for millions of dollars because on one system balance would be X thousand dollars, and on another system balance would be X $1,000 plus 7 or something. Like it'd be slightly out. I mean, minutely, but it would be different, and that's against the FDC or whatever, some standard or whatever. So they got sued. So that's the reason why that's a separate thing. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. And so we talked a lot about the realities of their product model. And it ultimately, what it highlighted to me was, every organization's product model is going to be different based on the situation of that organization. For instance, another area that they had was that needed to be, that I'd have instantly thought it was how they did resolution of financial resolutions. And basically I was like, well, that must be a set of algorithms inside every product. And they said, no, actually we want to provide this service to our broker network. And even though it's a very technical, finance thing that you'd think was distributed across all the financial products, no. And it is true from a business process perspective, they wanted it separate because they wanted to sell that service to their intermediaries. And we talked a little bit about AWS and how that evolved at Amazon. They did one of these tours and they went to Amazon like 10 years ago when AWS was just starting, and they realized that shared services could definitely be products as long as there's a roadmap, as long as there's a clear vision for it, and as long as each of the products that are dependent on it, they can influence the roadmap. Obviously, they have needs. However, if they have to change the roadmap for their own needs, then they're too deeply coupled. So you don't want to do that. So they have some very simple rules for what's a product and what's not. Now, the first time they did it, didn't work so well, and they noticed quite quickly that the level of communication between the different product groups, the level of collaboration was massive. So if you're aware of team topologies, ideally, if a product is dependent on another product, it needs to be as a service. The product provides this service, whether it's an API or even a user interface, but it's clearly just a service. So you don't have to collaborate. You just have to understand the service level and job done. If, however, you have to collaborate or, between two groups, then to deliver a value, then that you've got a heavier dependency, etc. So they discovered there was all these dependencies that were too great. So then they backed off and they looked at those dependencies. They did a view of the sort of like a heat map of where all those dependencies were. And then they realigned their products based on that to reduce those amount of dependencies. Ultimately, though, what they're striving for is autonomous teams that can deliver on their roadmaps in the most effective way. So allowing them to fulfill the needs of their users without this sort of like massive ripple effect across the organization. So they're localizing changes and value to the best of their ability. Now, obviously, there's a lot of transitions. They have legacy systems, and some of those legacy systems aren't aligned to the product model in the way that they would like them to. So there's a transition there, and there's a cost to that transition. And sometimes their users aren't willing to bear that cost, meaning the stakeholders, the customers, the investors aren't willing to bear that cost. So they're ultimately, and this was an interesting thing that I didn't realize. So they know through flow, they use flow metrics to measure, idea to implementation, cycle time, etc. They know how long things take, right? And they know that there's a lot of waste in their system. But to reduce that waste would require a capital investment, which their business isn't willing to do. So the business is more than willing for features to take, I don't know, a month, say, or 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm. True.
Whereas if they could actually get that down to a week or less, but the business is like, yeah, but it would require them to basically build a new legacy system or a new system, which they're not prepared to invest in. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But I guess having that transparency and those choices and making all those things explicit ultimately empowers them to drive to the right model. So out of that meeting, that discussion, I realized that my ideas of product were rubbish and that I needed to go back to the drawing board a little bit. And I did. And ultimately I delivered a webinar that talked a lot about those ideas based on not just that meeting, but then at subsequent meetings afterwards with other organizations. But I realized, number one, no product model is right.
At least it doesn't fit all organizations or teams.
Well, there's no one topology, yes.
Yeah.
But also inside your own organization, it won't be perfect.
Yeah.
But you can make it really bad. So you're always trying to make it as the least bad it can be at that time.
So you never do it completely right. It's always a little bit bad, but make sure it's not too bad.
Yeah, exactly. It's a bit like how you run a government. A government can never be perfectly run, but you don't want it to be really bad.
Yeah.
You want it to be somewhere in the middle, right?
And if it works for this country, doesn't mean it works for the other country. Same for teams.
Exactly. And gosh, we could really lean into that, but we're not going to. Anyway, so number one is that you're never going to get it right. So you have to be on, always monitoring it, which means that you need to put in place things like flow metrics, things like evidence-based management to ensure that your products are as effective as they can be. Flow metrics, in particular cycle time, but also waste and wait times between stages, etc. Mm-hmm. You're looking for that. How many dependencies does a product actually have? If a product is dependent on things where you don't have to influence the roadmaps of those things, and they're just services, whether it's cloud infrastructure, whether it's rating engines, whatever it is, then you're groovy. That's great.
Yeah.
When you have to start influencing, when you have to increase the fidelity of the communication between two product teams and collaborate to deliver value, then it starts getting problematic, and you want to reduce that as much as possible. You can see this physically, and I know we're probably not meant to talk about Teslas at the moment, but if you get into a Tesla,
bad example, perhaps.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's some politics there, which is
it's okay for now.
Hate the musician, not the music man. If you get into a Tesla, you will the steering wheel, the buttons, they feel a bit cheap, right? It's not high end. If you get into a Mercedes, you get into a BMW, very different experience. But Tesla has decided what's core and context. So it doesn't influence the design of those things, it buys them. Yeah. And then it uses them. Yeah. And it compromises the ultimate design, perhaps, but it accepts that because if it increases the complexity of the system by basically trying to influence its OEMs or its suppliers, then that implies a cost that it's not willing to bear. It will slow down the delivery of the product because of that. So ultimately, you're looking at that as some sort of heat map, as it were. And you're continually monitoring that. And it will change. The other great thing that the product model gives you, which I kind of learned from every single meeting, was the ability to buy or build. Ideally, you're only building products that are strategic for your business. Yeah. So in the case of, financial services company, maybe you're going to buy a CRM rather than build it. In the case of, but your core financial, reconciliation, balance, all of this stuff, that's unique to you. Mm-hmm. Therefore, you need to do it. Or is it? That's an interesting question. Is it better just to buy common off-the-shelf products and integrate them to provide that? Because your differentiator is the people that work in the call center or whatever. I don't know. You have to make the right choices. What product model provides you with, looking at this product model, it makes it very visible what your choices are. Yeah. So that's really, really interesting as well. The other thing that was really clear was that if you can't define value, so we talk about things like evidence-based management, which has 4 key value areas, 2 of which are very much about current value and potential value, as it were, unrealized value, we call it. If you can't clearly do that for your product, then is it really a product? Now, the value doesn't have to be just, people spending money. It could be usage, it could be simplicity, it could be something around citizenship, whatever. But the point is that you have to be able to clearly define value. Yeah. And at the end of the day, it has to be translatable into a financial measure to get that unification so you can do that P&L, because you are costing money delivering a product. So if you can't define the value, then you're in trouble. So having clear understanding of value, having clear understanding of stakeholders, having a clear ability to create a roadmap. If you have no ability to build a vision for this and a roadmap for this product, then is it really a product, or are you still working in a project?
So these kind of, like, let's say, examples around the product vision, team, value, stakeholders, all of these, if you can't describe it, you can't describe the product.
Yeah.
And the other way around, if you can describe it, that makes something
more
like
likely to make it a product, and probably will make it a product.
And do I understand it correctly? So that makes it that you only can do it terribly wrong, because if you don't know your stakeholders, you don't know your value, you don't know your product vision, you're doing it terribly wrong. Is that something like...
I mean, the word terribly is interesting, but it probably means that you're in an organization that hasn't switched over to a product thinking. You're probably in a project culture where you are using product as a proxy, so you can use Scrum or some agile approach, SAFe or whatever.
Yeah.
The reality is that if you can define a vision, if you can define value, then honestly, stakeholders will fall out, because often. So if you could, those two things are fundamental.
Yeah.
And if you can't, if it really is just work, and it's lots of different things, and the boundary keeps changing, and the value proposition keeps changing, then you're probably working in a project culture, which isn't horrible, don't get me wrong.
Which is totally fine.
And there's nothing wrong with that. But then you're not going to get the benefits of product thinking, which is around innovation, which is around flexibility, which is around outcome, which is about, sort of key value. If you can't measure value, then you can't influence it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
So, or certainly you can't direct it, so.
You can't really influence it to increase the value.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be increased by accident. I mean, it doesn't mean it's not going to be increased or decreased, but it's sort of like accidental.
Yeah.
If you're in a work culture, then the thing you can influence is work. You can deliver tasks, you can deliver projects, you can deliver outcomes, you can deliver those sort of things. So just accept that. Now, if you're in that situation and you want to move to more product thinking, well, then that's a whole different proposition.
Yeah.
But the first thing that you need to work out is this a product? Can we define it as a product? And then if you can, then all goodness happens.
Yeah, so back maybe a little bit about what are the signals in general that you can that you are given to, like, okay, you are not really defining the product correctly. So is that really the not able to be to tell who your stakeholders are and set product vision? Are the signals you're doing it wrong, or?
So I think there's two types of signals. There's one. Can you easily develop vision, value? Do you understand your stakeholders?
Yeah.
Is there a clear boundary? Do you have some level of stability, not in terms of the work, but in terms of the outcomes over the next couple of years? So you have a clear sort of roadmap, as it were. So that's one set. The other thing is, if you've got your products wrong, you will not delivery will be harder and will be more costly. Mm-hmm. And that tends to be measured with flow metrics. Yeah. It tends to be measured with cycle time. It tends to be measured with flow distribution.
Yeah, unhappy people, maybe?
I think, yes, I try to avoid saying that because it sounds a bit hippie, but it tends to be measured by friction, which can manifest itself in unhappy people. Mm-hmm. Though I've also seen organizations where their product model is completely wrong, where people are quite happy because it's like a chaos always. And that chaos, some people thrive on that. They love a crisis. Yeah. And they live for
tension
that.
And pressure.
They love tension and pressure, and the fact that when you haven't product models, though heroes obviously can exist in them, you're not relying on them. Because the product is continuously delivering, right? Mm-hmm. The product is continuously moving forward, and it's the sum of everybody working together. Whereas when you've got these highly friction-oriented environments, it tends to rely on human beings who are best at dealing with chaos, right? Systems aren't to sort of step in and manage that accordingly. But so think about the two sets of metrics. One is, can you, as a product owner, define a vision, a roadmap, a value proposition, and then obviously clearly understand your stakeholders, users, etc., that fall out of that. And then the other side is around flow metrics. Can you what's your average cycle time? What's your, is it getting harder? Have you got these bizarre distributions around work where it's really hard at the start and really hard at the end?
Yeah.
Well, there's a surprise. Can you release frequently? What's your, average release time? Those sort of flow metrics become incredibly powerful for seeing the pain in real time.
Yeah.
And if you've got those two things in front of you, then it might give you an opportunity to step back and say, hang on, are we defining our products correctly? Or is it something else?
Yeah.
Should we think about doing things differently? So a great example is organizations that tend to be orienting around their channels. So web, that's a product. Online, that's a product. Call center, that's a product.
Yeah.
You're like, is it? Okay, well,
or a functionality or a feature, that's a product. Could be, but...
Could be. And a shared service definitely could be a product. An internal capability could be a product. However, when you start aligning around those channels, then you start having potential lack of ability for each of those channels to actually deliver something, because obviously me as a customer, and this might not be true in your situation, but I as a customer can go on the web, can go on the mobile app, or I can phone a call center.
Yeah.
I'm assuming a consistent outcome with anything. I don't know if I fly a lot, as you can imagine, and what really, really, really annoys me is now I love delta.com. It's awesome. However, there are some moments where I was
a flying company, right?
Yeah. Well, it's a great organization, obviously partnered with the KLM.
Yeah.
So we Royal Dutch Airlines, as it were. So great company. But there's sometimes like getting a kid's meal. Now, my kids have got they're not the most adventurous at eating. So when we're flying, I like to order the children's meal. By the way, they already know that they're children because you have to type in their age.
Okay.
So on the mobile app, you go to one place for it. On the online app, you go to a different place. And there's sometimes where you can't find it at all.
Yeah.
And by the way, sometimes if you phone their call center, that's the easiest thing because they've got all of everything.
The access of everything, and they can
and they can just do it. And particularly if you're working with a partner like Delta versus KLM, it's a disaster. So the point is that maybe that should just be one product that has both web, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, it's up to them, and I'm sure I'm being incredibly simple here.
Here's some advice from your side.
And just for the record, it's an amazing experience, and they're an amazing airline, so I'm not dissing them at all, and I always enjoy my
but I see
experience.
what you mean. The value for you is fixing that your kids can eat their kids' meal.
Yeah,
and
I can do it quickly. I can book it in like literally. You remember, a few days before, you're like, oh, blimmin' heck. Because you don't want them to have to eat that, spicy food or whatever. And you know that if they get hungry on a plane, that you might as well just, it's the kiss of death for you.
Yeah.
So you focus on, and then you're like, okay, and you're walking somewhere, so quickly use the app, use the mobile app.
Yeah.
Oh, well, why is this? And then you're like, okay, I remember. Okay, I'll go and look online properly, and I'll make time to. It's just a nightmare.
Yeah,
it's all about improve. Now, interestingly, where does value fit there? Is me being happy at that moment really a differentiator? Is it not a differentiator? You've got to make some choices, and I appreciate that. And life as a product owner is always hard. It's making those trade-offs. But I think that thinking about your product architecture, meaning what your products are, I think it's a fundamental start point to all of this.
Yep. Yeah, you make me think about getting a little bit to the end of the podcast about the product owner itself. So you say in this Delta Airlines example, that should be one product. But if we change it the other way around, we see in the Netherlands that like 60% of product owners are product owner of multiple products. So you say let's define a product properly, and the other way around. What's your opinion about a product owner being product owner of multiple products, and where is like the line between you have enough focus for for one product, or you can do multiple products?
So that's actually a really interesting question. And the question you have to ask is, why are they working on multiple products? Is it because you've decided that each team has its own product that it works on? Therefore, every team needs a product owner. Therefore, every product owner is, so they break up products into teams. And because of that, we haven't got enough product owners. So that means you have to support multiple teams. So it depends on why.
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting first question you have to ask. Can a product owner support multiple products? Yeah, of course they can.
I think so, yeah.
I mean, that goes without saying. Now, the reality is that those products are going to get a different level of attention and care and loving depending on their particular needs. And at a certain point, you've got to make choices again about how much attention they really need. You know, there's no golden rule, unfortunately. How many products can a product owner manage, or how many teams can work on how many different products? What I do know, as a product owner, is that when I'm slicing, when I'm changing from one context to another, that's a cost.
It takes time.
And that overhead, and I'm the same for my team. So if my teams are working on multiple products, then, which is the reality, then what I tend to do is focus them for this sprint on this product. The majority of their time is on this product. Mm-hmm. Maybe doing some discovery on another product, but their focus is this product, and that's their priority.
You don't want to hop or ship people the whole time. You want to focus on work.
So I would reduce the sprint length and I would focus.
Yeah.
And that's true for me as well. I tend to, if you look at my schedule, I tend to block time, like 3-4 hour blocks, where I'm concentrating on something. Mm-hmm. And I have, I'm a very, I guess maybe a little weird, but I tend to focus not on the task. So I don't write, I'm going to create X number of white papers or whatever. I focus on the outcome that I'm trying to get to. Yeah. Like, I need to be able to explain this on all our channels. And then I focus on that for that period of time. And I, sometimes I'm not successful. Sometimes I get sidetracked by Slack or WhatsApp or just get bored, like everybody else. But by focusing, you can really save a lot of effort. Now, if I'm a product owner on multiple products, then the best way of ensuring that my boss, makes the right decision about that is by capturing metrics on those products. Yeah. And so let's build an EBM dashboard. Let's create some flow metrics on all of them. And then when you say, well, when he or she says, oh, why are you taking so long? Why was ideation on this idea? Why did that take 3 months? And you say, because I was working on the release of the other product that you're responsible for. Oh, I'd forgotten that. Oh, yeah.
There's always something more important than ideation, unfortunately.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, I was with another large financial institution just before Christmas in New York City, and they'd finally put in some flow metrics. Yeah. And they realized that they thought they were awesome because they were delivering, because when things hit the backlog, they were measuring that, Jira. Yeah. So they were like, yeah, look at this. It's brilliant. We're releasing on demand and everything's great. But the idea went into a different system like 6 months before. And so when they looked at the entire flow metrics, they realized that their customers, no wonder their customers weren't happy, because they were confused considering how good their delivery organization was, or they perceived it to be. Why was the customers not happy? So they were like, were we delivering the wrong things? Well, one of the reasons was because the ideas that came out weren't going into the system for 6 to 9 months. So by the time they actually got released, the users had forgotten that they'd even asked for them, Yeah. So, and then by that point, they were the wrong thing to do in terms of priority. Yeah. So they got that overall view. So if I was a product owner working on multiple products, I would start measuring that as quickly as possible, because it's very likely that you're going from one fire to another. And, the best way to avoid fires isn't to put them out. It's to do some some management of your forest or your towns, build some fire breaks, teach everybody, it's get ahead of it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see a lot of times that, for example, that's a very small team. You can be product owner of that team as well. So maybe there are 4 engineers in that team. So I think, okay, is that the way to measure whether you can have multiple teams or products? Yes or no? I think for sure not, because maybe that team of 4, there's a lot of ideation needed, market research, talking with clients, creating product vision, stakeholder management, and also, of course, running sprints, doing some engineering. Yeah. And that's, I think, a reflex to like, okay, product owner, you can do multiple teams because there are 3 small teams.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a
yeah.
weird,
So if somebody if they said, oh, this team hasn't got a product owner, would you join? I'd say, great, they're going to come and work on my product then.
Yeah, yeah.
And if they go, no, they've got their own day job. Oh, so now I'm taking over that product.
Yeah.
The reality for most organizations is that people think really that a product owner is a person that doesn't have the HR responsibilities, but is really telling the team what to do, which is true. That's exactly it. But in the context of something, so of a domain, and that domain is the product. So ultimately, the number of teams that support that a product owner works with is determined by that domain. Yep. Now, can they support multiple domains? Yes, but you're going to get what you pay for then, right? You're going to get them slicing it up. You're going to get them not having enough time.
Less focus, less quality.
So what I would do if I was in that situation is I would put a full-time product owner, a more junior maybe, a new product owner to that team. And then I would ask that other product owner to mentor that person and help them get better at it. So that then what you've got now suddenly, instead of one product owner that's not doing a good job for 2 sets of teams, you've got 2 product owners and you're building that flexibility and that capability into your organization. And if they say, well, we can't afford that, then the business doesn't warrant that, then you're like, well, hang on a minute, why have we even got a team then? Yeah. What is the cutoff?
What's the value of the team? Why is that team?
And this is the other interesting question. So when you've got 4 software engineers, I say it's a software product, and they're like, well, we've got 4 working on this product, but we can't afford a product owner. Well, hang on a minute. So you think that 4 people writing code is more valuable, and testing code and deploying code is more valuable than the person that's deciding what they're working on? Yeah. Honestly,
deciding what direction.
70%. Pendo did a survey recently. Was it 80%? I think it was 80% of the features that organizations deliver in software are rarely or never used. Yeah. So you've got 4 people delivering stuff,
right?
But exactly. Yeah. Now, obviously, it's easy to see, oh my God, look at all the code that's being delivered and look at that. So they're productive, right? Whereas the product owner, it's more intangible what the value that they add. But, what I would say, if you've got 4 people working on, software engineers and you can't afford a product owner, get rid of one of your software engineers. Yeah. In a nice, positive way and find them something else to do. I'm not talking about, firing them.
Not firing you, but
move them out. Now you've got 3 engineers and get a product owner, because those 3 engineers directed in the right place will be much more valuable.
Or quite likely to do the right thing.
Or realize that there isn't much value here. And then that allows you to downplay that product, reduce the investment, etc.
Yeah, thank you very much for promoting the product owner and the role of the product owner here. So that's great as well. Hey, let's wrap it up for the episode. It was great to have you here again, and in the Netherlands, this time in Utrecht. And I think this a lot. It was really interesting to me. But it's not only the podcast that you've been talking about this. You wrote blogs and webinars, right? Can you
So
address those?
If you go to scrum.org and look at innovations as the agile product operating model, click on there. There's a load of resources, webinars, blogs. There's a white paper that should be out, hopefully, by the time this podcast hits. Depends. It's in review at the moment. You know what that's like. It's always annoying. There's all sorts of resources that we have online that you can really help you look and ask some of these questions. Yeah. It's a challenging space. To be a product owner, you're ultimately in the middle of trying to deliver value to your customers, trying to deliver value to your users, trying to keep your team happy,
communicating what you're doing to literally everybody.
Yeah, and trying to get home in time so that your husband or wife doesn't beat you. Yeah. No, so the reality is that you're sort of in the worst possible position and under pressure from every angle, and that pressure is even harder when you haven't got the right product definition, where you're not working in the right clearly understood domain, where everybody's kind of like, yeah, this is a product, but it isn't, and da-da-da. So I totally understand or empathize with the pain that you're in every day. So I encourage you to seek help, to look at resources, step back a little bit. That can sometimes help. Yeah. Obviously, I would encourage you to come to the product owner event in Rotterdam in October the 2nd. So, fall in, because that's the autumn. So you'll have all had fabulous summer by then, and you can come and spend a day with all your fellow professionals talking about these challenges. Sometimes a problem shared is a problem halved, right? Don't they say? Yeah. So I was really impressed by the quality of the people at the event and the conversations, and everybody was very open to these conversations, and I learned lots from domains that I don't normally get exposed to. So I'd recommend that. Definitely go there. Obviously, go to scrum.org and look at the Agile Product Operating Model materials there, and keep connected on LinkedIn, etc. Ping me up if you've got any questions. David West, I think it's David Justin West or David J. West on LinkedIn. But
I will find you.
Yeah, I'm very easy to find, right? Again, scrum.org, you can also find me there and connect there.
Okay, yeah, cool. We will see each other again October the 2nd, and we will meet at least 1,000 other product owners. So I'm really looking forward to that event. It was great to have you here.
Well, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you for forcing me to come to Utrecht, which is a fantastic city. So I really appreciate that.
Great. And of course, at last, I would like to thank you, the listeners of the show as well, for listening again to the Product Owner Podcast, and I hope to see you again